interest this week, we turn our gaze to Punjab, which is one of the states heading for elections in just about 2 weeks from now. It's by no means India's largest state, but this is by no means India's least important state either. It's a state that punches way above its weight. It's a very important and very sensitive state. And you see what's happening there. It is somewhat odd that two former party and state cabinet colleagues, in fact, the former Chief Minister Amrinder Singh and his successor Charanjit Singh Channi, are fighting and trying to set up this election in terms of whether the state faces a rising security threat or not. Amrinder has been saying this, as he did, flashing several documents and data sheets in that off-the-cuff interview with me some time back on ThePrint. I will share a link with you. You can check out that full interview. It's quite interesting. He said in that interview that Pakistanis are dropping weapons, explosives, drugs and IEDs shaped to fit in lunch boxes, or what is loosely called tiffin bombs, through their drones. What he meant to say was that Pakistanis are now dropping a full terror package, including the means of financing, which is drugs, which is narcotics, in every drone that they send across the border. And many drones have been found. Some have been shot down, some have fallen, and some have dropped stuff which has been captured. Some have also dropped stuff which has not been captured, obviously. So that is what he's saying. He's saying that there is a big, grave security threat to Punjab. Channi has hit back in an interview with our political editor DK Singh, of which also I'll share a link with you, by ridiculing the security threat, quote unquote, and he's accused Amrinder Singh of having made it up to spread a scare. He says there is no such security threat in Punjab. Amrinder is making up stories just to scare people. The reality, in fact, as we are arguing in this national interest, a lot more complex and scary. Punjab has a security and stability threat, but it's just that Pakistani drones are not central to it. I'm not saying they are not a threat, they are also a threat, but they are not central to the instability and threat that Punjab faces. That comes from within. Let me try and explain to you how. Now, Punjab faces many mortal threats. Almost all of these, as I said, lie within. And while for some, you might be able to blame the center. For example, you might say that Punjab was built for the use of paramilitary forces during the decade plus of the insurgency, and that remains as a kind of debt against Punjab's name. Maybe center should have underwritten it, but because security is a state subject, this is how it was built. So to that extent, you can say center is to blame, at least partly, for Punjab's bankruptcy or Punjab's finances. But for most of the substantive troubles, Punjabis themselves are responsible. You have to be brave to be saying this, so I'm sticking my neck out to say it. And unless they take a brutal, hard look within, their future generations have to be resigned to continue living with this constant slide. Punjab is in a slide. Nobody has done anything to be able to reverse it for almost 2 decades now. Now, it's a tough thing for me to say this at an election time, but the state's problems are not going to be resolved by whoever comes to power. I'm sorry to sound so negative, but look at all the promises the 4 rival groups, Congress, Aam Aadmi Party, Shiromani Akali Dal and Amrinder BJP, are making. Nobody is promising to change or challenge the lazy, self-congratulatory culture that Punjab has voluntarily become prisoner to. All they are promising is freebies, more handouts. The incumbent chief minister has slashed power tariffs, and he also tears and burns the bills in public. That is the chief minister himself. And if this mass assassination of all principles of public finance is not bad enough, Aam Aadmi Party is promising a dole of 1,000 rupees a month to each woman in the state. Now, you may or may not support the idea of doles. You may, in fact, even turn around and tell me, look, what are doles? After all, Mr. Modi calls these direct benefit transfers. So what is a dole for one is a dole for other, or what is DBT for one is DBT for other. So what are you complaining about? But see it another way. Here is a state which is still imprinted on our country's collective memory as the richest, the happiest, the most robust in the country, right? One that employs millions of migratory laborers, the so-called bhaiyas on its lush fields. They come from UP, Bihar, Hindi heartland mainly. It also makes the largest contribution to nation's rice and wheat surplus stores. How come it still has these tens of millions of women, a leading political challenger and a smart one, like Aam Aadmi Party, uh, believing that it can entice with just 1,000 rupees a month, just 1,000 rupees a month. Rupees 1,000 is the kind of money an average bhaiya would make in just about 3 days of work. In fact, less than 3 days of work in Punjab. And who will be employing them? Essentially, the families of the same women who are now being enticed with 1,000 rupees a month. So, how does all this add up? Something is wrong there. That Punjab is the richest state in India is a story out of date by about 20 years now. Actually, even now in most parts of India, particularly in the Hindi heartland, if you go to a school, maybe to a rural school or a small town school, and ask the children to tell you which is the richest state in India, a lot of them will say Punjab. But the fact is that Punjab is the richest state in India is a story out of date by about 20 years. It was the richest state about 20 years ago. Since then, it's been a story of a consistent and steep slide. At this point, it has slipped to, hold your breath, number 15 among the larger states. In fact, 19 if you could also add union territories. But of course, let's leave out Delhi, Chandigarh, etc. because those are very small, Puducherry. Now, big states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Gujarat are all way ahead of Punjab in terms of how rich their people are on a per capita basis. That is not something that most people will immediately buy. In fact, I suspect that many of you will now start Googling listening to this. In fact, if you go purely by parameters of nominal per capita income, even Arunachal beats Delhi. Now, Arunachal is a very small population, so that will distort the picture. That is the reason I am qualifying this very strongly. At number 19, Punjab is the last in the number of states in the list of states and union territories above the national per capita income average. After Punjab comes West Bengal, which is the first state, which is at the top of the second half, top of the list of the states and union territories, which are below the national average per capita income. And the way Punjab is right now lagging behind, who knows? Who knows at some point West Bengal will also catch up with Punjab. Who knows? They get their act together on their industry. I'm just giving you a theoretical possibility because if all these other states have left Punjab behind, what is to stop West Bengal also doing it in the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years? Now, if that happens, how flattering it would be for the Punjabi ego and how shattering for our old stereotypes to be told that, hold your breath, Punjabis are poorer today than Madrasis or Bengalis, right? I borrowed these words from the general native usage in Punjab. How did Punjab end up like this? As other progressive agricultural states, Madhya Pradesh in particular, learned modern farming and ran up the ladder. Madhya Pradesh is not richer than Punjab, mind you, but Madhya Pradesh has done very well on agriculture. As they ran up the ladder, the state now actually contributes more wheat to the national pool than any other, including Punjab. Punjab, meanwhile, stagnated, caught in that same rice paddy wheat cycle, and MSP. So, Punjab, meanwhile, stagnated. The spectacle they built around Delhi during the farm protests was vibrant, colorful, and heady, particularly if you were a critic of Narendra Modi's. And they won a famous victory against Narendra Modi and the might of the BJP for sure. But one reason so many landowners among those protesters could be at the protests is that they had bhaiyas minding their fields back home, and their adult children were meanwhile busying themselves putting together desperate jugaad to escape overseas. In many cases illegally and rarely with committed employment. Some use the ploy of marriage, some use the ploy of sponsorship by a relative, a lot of them just go illegally through a network of agents and crooks that in Punjab for some reason is called kabutarbazi. You will in fact read more about this as we go along in our coverage of what's happening in Punjab right now. Now, it's a quaint phenomenon. I import millions of migrant laborers from Hindi heartland to work on my fields in Punjab. Meanwhile, my children are all running hell for leather for Canada and often as illegals via Europe. They are found everywhere in these illegal immigration zones in Europe now. I call your attention to two things. The first is the story by our young reporter Shubhangi Mishra. I'll share a link with you. She documented this incredible tale of reverse gender victimization in Punjab, although I'm not sure the enormous Punjabi ego would survive that or survive that description. It is the tragedy of the Punjabi, mostly Sikh husbands abandoned by their wives. And yes, you heard that right. Add this to a new Punjabi phenomenon to the stereotypes from lassi, makki di roti, saag, leg, peg, tittar, kukkad. Tittar is partridge, kukkad is chicken. That you've been fed all this while. Wives abandoning husbands, right? Now, I'd suggest you go to Amazon Prime and watch a full-length Punjabi feature film titled Jat versus IELTS. The IELTS in this case is International English Language Testing System. It's a very basic examination of English reading, writing, comprehension, speaking. That is the first requirement for a visa to Canada and many such Anglophone countries, which all happen to be dream destinations in Punjab. Now, every year, lakhs of Punjabis take this exam and mostly flunk. It's not as if it's not taken by people in other states, particularly in Gujarat, a lot of people take it, but not like Punjab. In fact, if you drive around Punjab, you will think that IELTS is the most high-selling commodity in Punjab right now. Everybody has a dream of cracking IELTS and getting some kind of a visa and getting away ideally to Canada or maybe to UK or some country away from Punjab, some western country away from Punjab. So every year lakhs of Punjabis take this exam and most flunk, right? In the film, the hero who does nothing except show off his daddy's motorbike or daddy gifted motorbike or occasionally rides his daddy's tractor, routinely orders his mother to fetch him a glass of water, comes home, spreads out on a charpai, tells his mom, "Acha mom, pani de," right? Often gets drunk and parties and has only one dream. He's a good for nothing, but he has one dream: how to crack IELTS and reach Canada, so as his true believing mother says, her son will play in dollars. Dollar na which khelega. It is just that in this battle of JAT versus IELTS, the acronym which is IELTS keeps winning and the JAT keeps losing. So the parents get desperate and the parents try and find a solution. And what is the most popular solution that parents in traditional Indian families tend to find for their good for nothing sons? That is to find a bride who's not so good for nothing. So finally, the hapless yet determined parents find for their wastrel of a son a bride who's already cracked IELTS, right? She's cracked IELTS. She has a visa to go to Canada. That's the sole qualification. And in any case, the dude isn't interested in her, even on his Sohagrat. He's just checking out the prospects of getting to Canada as soon as possible. Because the idea is that he wants her to go to Canada ASAP and then call him back on a spousal visa, on a spouse visa. She goes there for sure and forgets all about the waiting husband. That is the abandoned husband we are talking about. And that is the abandoned husband Shubhangi's story talks about. Punjab now has so many of them that associations are being formed to fight for their rights. Lawyers and policemen are thinking of contracts for wives with liabilities just in case they do not call the husband back in, uski zameen jabt kar lo, maybe forfeit their land or forfeit their home or something. I don't believe such a thing is possible under the law, but people try. So watch also a video that I'm sharing with you. That is Shubhangi's story, and see, all this while we thought that only husbands abandon their wives, and that's a statement of masculine or male power. See now, wives abandoning their husbands, that's also a statement of female power, or maybe in this case, just the statement of intellectual power. The film has a significant twist in the end and a virtuous one. but not in the manner that the woke you might have imagined. I will not give away the story. Please watch the film. You can fast forward parts of it, but it's still quite educative. Now, it is this hopelessness, loss of self-esteem, the overwhelming escape to the culture of intoxicants, good living, emigrating as unskilled illegals that endangers Punjab. In fact, during the 2014 parliament elections, when I saw Bhagwant Mann, who's Aam Aadmi Party's chief ministerial candidate, campaign for the first time in the Malwa region, he was saying precisely this, that see, you see people migrating from Tamil Nadu, from Andhra, etc., from the south. They are not, they are software engineers, they are entrepreneurs, they are setting up startups. They are not driving taxis. And it goes on to say that, see, Canadians and the British, one, they must be so grateful to us Punjabis because they'd like to send us thank you letter saying it's only thanks to you that we have people with master's degrees and PhDs driving our taxis. That is people from Punjab who mostly go as illegals or like economic refugees. And he says also that maybe even the British would say that if you were so desperate to come and do menial jobs for us, why did you send us away when we were your colonial masters? And he goes on to say that if you look at all that, you can't even look the statues, the busts of our martyrs, particularly Sardar Bhagat Singh, in the eye. Why did he die at 23? If all Punjabis were to be reduced to was this desperate rush to go to the same country whose colonial rule he was fighting. Now, the fact is that people in Punjab are not starving for food. They are quite well endowed in that area. They have more than enough to feed themselves. And if you walked in as a guest, they will feed you quite heartily as well. So while you celebrate their pizza langars and things, the fact is that underlying that is this lack of self-esteem, lack of opportunity. There is ambition, but there is no opportunity. They do not have employment or the culture of entrepreneurship anymore, unless entrepreneurship is about somehow trying to find a visa and a ticket to Canada. Finally, check out on YouTube this Deutsche Welle documentary titled Portugal, Modern Slavery for an EU Passport. You will find so many Punjabis trafficked in after paying a bomb to the agents or on tourist visas for which they say they paid up to 15,000 euros. How much money is that? That's about 13 lakh rupees or thereabouts, 12, 13 lakh rupees or thereabouts just for a tourist visa. They earn slave wages on an hourly basis, live in slave dormitories, toil endless hours planting, watering and plucking raspberries and other such fruit for which Portuguese labor is too expensive. They do it because after 7 years of this hard labor, this hard slave labor, you get a Portuguese passport, which one of the people interviewed in this documentary tells you, lets you enter 158 countries without a visa. The Punjabis obviously demonstrate here that they can work very, very, very hard too, and as migratory laborers, just like the bhaiyas they employ back home. The only difference is that unlike most of the Punjabis in Europe and elsewhere right now trying to fight their way to Canada, the bhaiyas are not illegally in Punjab. Now, if you see all these unhappiness, anger, frustration, that is the real threat to the stability and security of Punjab. And if the Pakistanis are trying to fish in troubled waters, why would they not try to do so? So these drones are actually the Pakistani way of exploiting the current internal situation in Punjab.